In the quiet atmosphere of these recent days, Cancer may begin to notice the softest movement within their own heart. Not something dramatic, not a loud breakthrough, not even a clear sign you can point to. Just a subtle feeling, like the tide shifting in the middle of the night while the surface of the ocean still looks perfectly calm. You've always been sensitive to those subtle changes, before words are spoken, before a message appears on your phone. Your heart has usually already whispered something to you. Maybe the person who once kept their distance, who stepped back when things started to feel deeper, is now sitting in a quiet space of their own. Not a silence meant to avoid, but a silence meant to reflect. Sometimes, when life feels crowded with responsibilities, with complicated relationships, with expectations pulling in every direction, people choose silence as a way to protect themselves. But over time, that silence becomes a mirror reflecting everything that was never said. And in that mirror, your image still seems to remain. Cancer tends to love with their whole soul. You don't do halfway. You don't love casually. You listen. You support. You see the most fragile parts in someone, even the parts they try to hide. So when someone pulls away or closes their heart, you don't just feel disappointment. You start wondering, did I miss something? Did I overlook a sign? But some journeys are not yours to fix. Some journeys are meant to teach you that everyone grows at their own rhythm. Some people simply need more time to recognize what truly matters to them. Maybe this person is looking back at their choices now. Maybe they're realizing that busyness, that pride, that old attachments don't bring the peace they once thought they did. And when someone starts asking themselves, where am I actually going? They often remember the place where they once felt safe. For some Cancers, you were that place, a quiet anchor, a steady voice that could calm their mind in the middle of chaos. What makes you different is your intuition, not intuition used to control, not intuition used to judge, but the ability to feel the emotional current running beneath the surface. You notice the shift in someone's eyes, the pause between their words, the subtle change in how they say your name. Sometimes you question yourself, am I imagining this? But Cancer's sensitivity isn't weakness, it's a gift, even if at times it feels like a burden. And while everything still feels unclear, maybe the most important question isn't, what are they going to do? Maybe the real question is, where are you standing in your own journey? You've learned to set boundaries. You've learned to speak your needs. You've learned not to accept what hurts you. That growth isn't loud, but it's steady, like shoreline sand that becomes firmer after being shaped by countless waves. If this person truly is rethinking things, considering their next step, that reflects their journey more than it defines your worth. You don't need to dim your light to keep someone from leaving. You don't need to chase to prove your love is valuable. When love matures, it tends to move toward willingness, not pressure. Some connections carry a feeling of unfinished business, like a story that paused mid-sentence. But sometimes that unfinished chapter helps each person understand themselves more clearly. For Cancer, every emotional experience is a wave teaching you compassion, patience, and how to love without losing yourself. Whether this person steps closer or remains at a distance, you are still growing through that understanding. On quiet nights, when you allow yourself to slow down, you might ask, what does my heart truly want? Not to be chosen, but to be valued. Not to be pursued, but to be partnered. And when you become clear about that, the movements around you start making more sense. Maybe this subtle shift is simply a reminder that life is always moving, that people can learn from missed timing. And maybe what's unfolding here isn't just about two people. Maybe it's also about you returning to yourself, returning to your values, returning to that gentle but resilient light inside the Cancer soul. And as you keep walking forward, heart open but self-respect intact, the current of life continues to guide you quietly, steadily, toward what truly aligns with the most honest rhythm of your own heart. And then, when distance is no longer just physical space, but becomes a space for reflection, something begins to shift in the way they look back at everything. Sometimes people step away not to forget, but to understand. I mean, not because they're forced to, but because deep down they realize that if they keep moving the same way, they may lose something more important than they once thought. For many people, distance feels like the easiest way to avoid facing emotions that feel too big. When feelings reach depths, they're not ready to explore. Silence becomes a refuge. Silence postpones answers. Silence avoids explanations. Silence keeps them from having to admit why their heart reacted so strongly. But silence has a voice of its own. In the nights when there's no one left to talk to, in the quiet moments when nothing distracts the mind, the questions begin to sound louder. There may have been a time when every time you tried to go deeper, they pulled back. Maybe they blamed the timing, the circumstances, the pressure around them, anything except the fear they carried inside. And when things between you felt too real, too close, they may have been the one to create distance as a way to regain control. For some people, control feels like safety, but eventually distance stops feeling like relief. It starts to feel like an empty space that can't quite be filled. They might notice that no matter how busy they are, no matter how much they redirect their attention, a part of them keeps circling back to moments shared with you. Not dramatically, not obsessively, just quietly. A sentence you once said, suddenly resurfacing in the middle of the day. Advice they once brushed off, now sounding wiser than they realized. When distance turns into a mirror, they begin to see not only you, but themselves inside the connection. They may start asking, why did I feel threatened when they expressed their feelings? Why did I choose silence when they asked for clarity? And maybe for the first time, instead of searching for outside explanations, they turn inward to understand what was truly happening. The question, what does this actually mean to me, may not appear just once. It may follow them into quiet spaces, into moments of reflection, into memories they thought they'd filed away. And when someone begins asking that question, it often signals growth, not explosive change, not overnight transformation, but slow awareness, layer by layer. For Cancer, watching someone rethink, you can stir mixed emotions. Part of you may feel seen, acknowledged, understood, even if late. Another part may stay cautious, wondering if this reflection runs deep enough to truly matter. But what makes this different is not what they might do next. It's that you are no longer standing still. You're not frozen and waiting. You've learned how to keep living, how to keep tending to your inner world, even without clear answers. If they are seriously reconsidering your role in their life, it may not arrive with a dramatic announcement. No grand declaration, no sweeping confession, just subtle shifts. A different tone when speaking about the past. A softened view of conversations they once minimized. A quiet recognition that your presence was never something ordinary. That you stood beside them, asking for nothing more than honesty. And in that realization, they may begin to see that you were not simply there. You were a gift they hadn't fully known how to value. Cancer understands the depth of true connection. You don't search for surface-level bonds. So when someone begins to look back and recognize the meaning of what existed between you, it feels like a gentle breeze moving through your heart. Not strong enough to sweep you away, but strong enough to remind you that every experience serves a purpose in growth. And as distance slowly transforms into reflection, perhaps what matters most is not the outcome, but the way you continue to breathe steadily, the way you keep walking in the quiet light of your own inner world. So no matter where this story turns, you remain grounded in your worth. While those unspoken thoughts continue flowing softly between two hearts that may still have more to understand about what they once shared and what it truly meant down and then. In the middle of days that seem to have returned to their usual rhythm, there's something still quietly there, not loud, not dramatic, but steady enough that it can't simply be ignored. No matter how busy they are with work, with responsibilities, with complicated situations that need untangling, you still cross their mind in the most natural way, like an old melody suddenly playing in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. Maybe they're driving home after a long day, and out of nowhere they remember the way the two of you once talked under soft lighting. Maybe they read a quote somewhere and realize you once said something similar. They just didn't really hear you at the time. Those early memories when everything felt simple before misunderstandings layered over it may be resurfacing now, not to punish them, not to haunt them, but to remind them. They might remember the way you speak, unhurried, unforced. The way you look at them, not just at the surface, but as if you can see the emotions they try so hard to hide. Some people enter our lives and leave a strong impression, Others leave something deeper, quieter, more enduring. For some Cancer souls, you may be the second kind in their story. This pull isn't easy to explain. It's not just surface-level romance. It feels more like an invisible thread, sometimes loose, sometimes stretched thin, but never fully broken. And what confuses them may be this. Out of so many options, so many faces, so many distractions, you're still the one their thoughts pause on just a little longer. What's interesting is that this feeling brings both peace and fear. Peace, because thinking about you brings softness, a sense of being accepted without performance. Fear, because feeling safe often means removing armor. And not everyone is ready to let someone see their most vulnerable self. Even if it's only in thought being near, you may make them feel more like themselves. No need to impress, no need to exaggerate strength. But that authenticity also forces them to face what they once avoided. When you see through them, not to judge, but to understand, it can leave them feeling grateful and slightly exposed at the same time, because not everyone is used to being seen fully. Cancer, you're familiar with emotional currents. Maybe you felt that invisible pull too. But even with distance still present, something remained. Maybe in quiet moments you've wondered why this connection never completely dissolved, even when logic tried to close the door. That silent attraction doesn't always need a clear explanation. Sometimes it simply exists, like a soft heartbeat, reminding two souls that something between them was never fully spoken. But perhaps the deeper question isn't whether they can resist that pull. The deeper question is, where are you standing in this story now? Are you still as open as before? Or have you learned to protect your heart with wiser boundaries? The safety they feel when thinking of you is something you deserve to receive as well, not one-sided, not hidden. If your presence brings them peace that reflects something rare within you, you create space for others to be themselves. But you're also learning that this space should not become a place where you sacrifice too much of yourself. No matter how strong the attraction is, it requires sincerity from both sides to truly grow. And so, amid all the noise of life, that quiet pull remains, like underground water flowing beneath the surface, not rushing, not forcing, just reminding both of you that some connections aren't easily dismissed. As you continue listening to your own heart, neither rushing forward nor shutting down, this story keeps unfolding in its own rhythm. A rhythm where two souls may slowly come to understand why turning away was never quite as simple as it seemed. And while that pull still quietly exists, in another corner of the story, they may be facing a weight they've grown used to carrying. Not something obvious to the outside world, but heavy enough to shape how they love, how they choose, how they move closer or pull away. Maybe it's a relationship that continued out of responsibility, more than emotion. Maybe it's financial pressure that made them feel never quite enough, never quite ready. Or maybe it's simply an old belief that love requires defense, that opening up means getting hurt. Some beliefs are formed in the past, through disappointments, through broken promises, through moments that left scars. When someone carries those beliefs long enough, they start to feel like identity, hard to recognize, even harder to release. But there comes a point when the heart begins craving peace, more than control. And that's when those old beliefs start being questioned. They may begin asking themselves, do I still want to live inside this old fear? Or am I ready to step into something different, a space where emotions aren't imprisoned? Letting go is never dramatic at first. It rarely happens in a single bold moment. It's usually quiet. One day they notice they no longer want to argue the way they used to. One day they feel exhausted from constantly maintaining a strong, untouchable image. One day they look at what they once thought was essential and realize it doesn't carry the same meaning anymore. These shifts are small, but over time, small shifts change direction. And maybe they are stepping away from a connection that no longer fits, even if it means walking into uncertainty. Maybe they are reorganizing their finances so they're no longer trapped by the fear of not having enough. Maybe they're learning how to remove that protective shell of ego, the armor that once kept them safe, but also kept them distant from something real. If this is happening, it's not because someone forced them. It's because inside, another voice has begun to rise, softer, but steadier. Cancer, you understand something important. Real change only lasts when it comes from within. You may have once hoped they would see your value, hoped they would find the courage to choose you, but deep down, you also know. A choice only matters when it's voluntary. If they are beginning to release old patterns that may signal growth, not reaction, not impulse, growth. When someone chooses a new path, they usually walk through quiet reflection first. They may feel lost for a while, as if walking without the old map they once relied on. But in that in-between space, they finally get to hear what they truly want. And if during that reflection, your image still appears, that isn't random. Still, the most important thing is that you don't place your entire hope on their process of letting go. You are not required to become someone's motivation to change. Your task is simpler. Continue living in alignment with your values. Continue cultivating the inner peace you worked so hard to build. If they are learning to choose differently, that choice must rest on respect and balance. Letting go isn't always losing something. Sometimes it's reclaiming freedom. And as they begin to loosen old burdens, they may start seeing more clearly who truly matters in the road ahead. But wherever this story turns, you remain the one who keeps the gentle light inside your heart alive. A light that doesn't depend on who stays or who leaves. A light nourished by your self-awareness, your dignity, your quiet strength. And as life continues flowing forward, that current may be guiding both of you closer, not just to each other, but to a more honest version of yourselves. And in all of this movement, your role may not be as small as you once thought. Cancer, you were never the one chasing. You were never the one trying to pull someone back with promises or overextending yourself. But you were simply the one who spoke the truth of your heart, calmly, directly, without drama, without threats, just clarity. There may have been moments when you realized you couldn't keep accepting vague explanations. You no longer wanted to hear circular reasoning for silence, for distance, for the times your feelings were placed second. And instead of arguing, instead of convincing, instead of over-explaining, you chose to say what you needed, not to control, but to respect yourself. For Cancer, setting boundaries isn't building a cold wall. It's protecting the softness inside you. You understood that without boundaries, you might slowly lose yourself, trying to keep someone else comfortable. And when you finally said, enough, when you stopped accepting familiar excuses, they may have stepped back, not because you were wrong, but because they weren't used to this version of you, clear, steady, grounded. And sometimes that initial step back opens another door. So when you stopped chasing, stopped over-explaining, you created space. And in that space, they had room to look at themselves. Your clarity became a mirror. In that mirror, they may have seen how they reacted, how they avoided, how ego sometimes stood in place of understanding. And that mirror didn't judge. It simply reflected. You didn't try to change them. You didn't force them to become who you wanted. You stood in your own value. Like a lighthouse that doesn't run after the ship, but still shines through the night. If someone wants to move closer, they adjust their direction. And whether you realized it or not, that quiet stance may have carried more impact than any persuasion ever could. Cancer carries gentleness, but also quiet strength. When you calmly speak your truth, when your intuition names what hasn't been acknowledged, you don't just touch someone's emotions. You reach the parts they've tried to ignore. Perhaps that composure made you unforgettable, not because you demanded, but because you were real. If an awakening is unfolding, it may not come from a dramatic shock. It may begin with something simple you said, words that came from the deepest part of you. When you said you deserved respect, to be heard, to be met clearly, you weren't just speaking for yourself. You were defining the standard of love you're willing to participate in. Maybe you've questioned if you were too firm, if your honesty created distance. But sustainable connection rarely grows from silent endurance. It requires courage, and you showed it. Not perfectly, not always softly, but sincerely enough to make someone think. And as they begin reflecting, asking themselves why your presence feels significant, part of the answer may be you, the way you never abandoned your kindness, but also never abandoned yourself. The way you showed that love does not mean losing your boundaries. And in the quiet space of their reflection, they may slowly realize that what moved them wasn't just emotion. It was character, stability, understanding. The warm light you carry without effort, and without even trying, you may have become part of their growth. While they learn how to mature, you continue walking forward, gentle, steady, watching to see what this road might reveal when both hearts begin to see each other more clearly than ever before. When and then, in the middle of all these quiet shifts, a possibility begins to take shape in the stillness around you. Not a promise, not something guaranteed, just a possibility that at some point there could be contact, a message appearing when you least expect it, a phone call with a voice slower than before, or simply a small step forward, but clearer than anything that came before. If that moment comes, the difference may not be in the action itself, but in the quality of it. Not impulsive, and not spoken out of loneliness, not rushed, but shaped by reflection, by long nights where they ask themselves what they truly want and what they're willing to let go of in order to move forward. Cancer. You are no longer the version of yourself who waits in silence. You've walked through self-questioning. You've faced sadness. You've learned how to comfort yourself instead of expecting someone else to fill the empty spaces. That growth didn't make you cold. It made you steady. You're still gentle, but you no longer trade your peace so easily. So if they move toward you, the rhythm will feel different. You're no longer willing to accept half-spoken words, half-formed emotions. You need clarity, not to control, but to understand where you stand. You know that love, if it's going to mature, needs transparency. It can't survive forever in the shadow of uncertainty. And if they are truly choosing you, that choice may come with things they must release. Not just an old relationship, not just a circumstance that no longer fits, but old ways of loving, old defenses, old avoidance. Choosing you may mean choosing a more honest way of living, one where they no longer hide behind ego or fear. Still, what matters most is that you do not place your entire worth inside their decision. You're not waiting to be validated. You already know your value. You knew it when you spoke your truth, when you set boundaries, when you kept walking, even without answers. If they return, it adds to your journey. It does not complete you. If a meeting happens, there may be awkwardness at first. You've both changed, both reflected, both seen yourselves from new angles. But in that change, there's space for a different kind of conversation. Less defense, less blame, more listening. Cancer understands that every connection has its own cycle. Some close quietly, some reopen on new foundations. If this story continues, it may not look like it once did. It may require greater maturity, more patience, deeper honesty. And if one day you receive that signal, what matters most won't be the first words they say. It will be how you feel when you hear them. Is your heart calm? Do you feel respected? Do you still carry the gentle light you've nurtured within yourself? Those questions will guide you further than any promise. And in the end, whether they step closer or remain at a distance, you are still walking your own path, learning to love without losing yourself, learning to stay open while honoring your dignity. And perhaps that growth itself is the most important part of this entire story. As you keep moving forward, listening to your heartbeat, letting life carry you toward what truly aligns with the deep, steady, warm soul of Cancer.